Hey podcast community, it's Eric, and I've got something exciting for all you online entrepreneurs out there. If you're looking to take your e-commerce store to the next level, you need to check out Aurora Repricer. With Aura, you can effortlessly reprice your Amazon inventory automatically. Ready to elevate your Amazon business? Head over to MilwaukeeMafia.com/Aura. That's AURA to get started today.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin, we are back again.
Yes, we are.
And we are back on a timeline. What are we talking about today?
All right. So we are on the timeline. We're in 1966, and this is Dominick Frinzi runs again.
All right. So he's going back for the governorship, huh?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of episodes of Dominick Frinzi just doing Dominick Frinzi things. And this is one of them. A little background here to put this in perspective. The FBI was wiretapping his law office, which was at 161 West Wisconsin Avenue in Milwaukee, so right there downtown. They started wiretapping in April 1963. They pulled the bug back out on October 2nd of 1963, so whatever that is, 5-6 months. Wasn't like a super long time, but, for a while. They had actually tried to get an extension, but the FBI headquarters in Washington was like, "No, you guys got to pull it." So Milwaukee wanted to keep it there longer, but the headquarters was like, "No."
So are we in a period? We're still in a period of time where this is completely illegal.
This is completely illegal.
It's just funny to me that they have guidelines of when you need to pull it out and pull it back in if it's illegal to do it.
Yeah, it's completely illegal, but they were supposed to get reauthorization every 6 months.
Okay.
So, yes, I know. It makes no sense. So that was going on. What the FBI would later say is that the reason they had put the bug in his office wasn't to spy on him specifically. The reason is they were trying to crack the case of Tony Burnett, who had been kidnapped and murdered in Kenosha.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought that some of the people that he met with as a defense attorney might talk about it in his office.
Okay.
That doesn't make it okay. Just to be clear.
In fact, I would go as far as to say, doesn't this bugging a lawyer's office to get testimony from client, what is it, client-lawyer privilege conversation just adds a layer of illegalness to it, right?
It actually kind of does. But that was their justification. It was like, we're just that desperate to get information. That's how we're going to try to do it. And they got nothing. Mm-hmm. They got nothing. So that didn't even work for them. So we move forward now. Summer of 1965, Dominick Frinzi had lost his last governor race, but he announces that he's probably going to run for governor again when 1966 rolls around. He knows that people are already talking about who's going to run. He's like, there might be the lieutenant governor might run. There's a national committee man who might run. He goes, I better get in while I can. Now, the Democratic Party establishment, he was running on the Democratic Party ticket, didn't particularly like him. Mm-hmm. Because, as you may recall, when he ran in 1964, what happened is the Democrats ended up losing by a small enough margin that had he not run at all, they may have won.
Okay.
So, debatably, his running had lost them the race the last time. So they weren't super thrilled with him. September 1965, a campaign committee is organized for him. A guy from Greendale, who will never come up again, a guy from Campbellsport, And then the treasurer was Dr. Vito Guardalabene, who we've talked about before, so a known name there. November 1965, Frinzi holds a press conference at his home, officially announcing that he would run for governor again in 1966. He had written a 6-page platform paper of the things that he wanted to get done. He announced, "I am running as a liberal progressive Democrat. To me, liberal does not mean free spending, nor does progressive mean progress at any price. Instead, he simply felt that we can always improve society and government. He said he would win by proposing concrete and realistic solutions to our problems and by speaking up only when I really have something to say. He wanted a gradual repeal of the state sales tax, an increase in the driving age to 18, an end to school segregation, and the reduction of real estate commissions from 6% to 4%. Regarding the sales tax, he said, taxes have disappeared before, and this one should be marked for eventual oblivion." So it's kind of a mixed bag here. I'm sure a lot of people were in favor of him trying to get rid of the sales tax. Mm-hmm. Not sure how thrilled people were about him raising the driving age to 18. This is the 60s, maybe things were different, but I feel like today that wouldn't go over very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There was a testimonial dinner held for him at the Schrader Hotel at $25 a plate. Frank Balestrieri was there. He brought along several of his guys, including Sam Dentiste, Jimmy Gennaro, Joe Aliotto, and some others. Also present were County Supervisor Eugene Grabschmidt and Alderman Mark Ryan, Alan Calhoun, and George Widow, as well as several judges. Dr. Vito Guardalabene arrived separately from Balestrieri, but he also sat at Balestrieri's table.
And Vito Guardalabene, is this the son? Like, how many generations down is this from the mob boss, Vito Guardalabene?
So his dad was in the mob, but he is the grandson of the original Vito.
Okay.
In January 1966, Richard Steinberg, the Democratic Party chairman of Milwaukee County, made a public statement that Dominick Frinzi had no chance and would only get $25,000 votes. Or not 25,000 votes, sorry. Yes, I am a little sleepy today. 25,000 votes. Frinzi supporters jeered him. Frank Calerco, Frinzi's campaign chairman, said this figure was twice what people predicted in 1964. He goes, well, if the predictions work out the same as last time, man, he might get over 200,000 votes and win in a landslide. They also thought it was really strange that the party would attack any of their party members. Summer of 1966, Frinzi lays out his political position on segregation. He says, as governor, I would urge the state superintendent and the attorney general to make a determination of the facts surrounding de facto segregation in Milwaukee's school system. They would then set a 1-year deadline for satisfactory plan to realign school boundaries to bring about a healthier balance of student distribution. If that plan was not forthcoming, the state would move in and act. Milwaukee should use busing for overcrowding and integrate bus students completely. And I'll say this, Wisconsin, unlike some of the southern states, was not segregated legally. Like it wasn't written into the laws. It was just a segregation that had sort of naturally developed.
Okay.
Some of it is not naturally developed. Some of it, there's a whole history of how neighborhoods come to be, and it's not a great history, way outside the scope of this podcast. But there was nothing legally blocking a black student from going to a white school. There was nothing like that.
But it was
books.
just kind of one of those things where you knew as a black student that these were the schools you were welcome to go to, more or less.
Yeah. And so what he's saying here, the segregation he's talking about, it exists. In fact, it still exists today. Anyone familiar with Milwaukee is not going to deny that Milwaukee is a segregated city. But, yeah, he's kind of thinking of ways to kind of break that up a little bit. I don't know how popular that was or wasn't as an idea, but towards the end of the 1966 campaign season, the news of Frinzi's office being bugged came out. This gave him an excuse to kind of back off from the governor's race, which wasn't going all that well, and switch gears to attacking government lawbreakers. He ended up taking third in the Democratic primary. So yeah, he didn't do great.
Get on the ticket then.
No. November 1966, Judge George Young, president of the Milwaukee Bar, and Ray McCann, president of the State Bar, released a statement of outrage over the disclosure that the FBI had bugged his office. The right of a troubled person to confer with an attorney in private is virtually sacred and has been protected by law for centuries. Let it be understood that the State Bar and the Milwaukee Bar Association have the utmost respect for all law enforcement agencies and are aware of the difficulties these agencies have, but if the foregoing report is true, the bar associations cannot refrain from expressing their abhorrence for the disregard and violation of the ancient privilege existing between lawyer and client. So now he's switching gears. The governor's race is not going to play out well. You know, he knows he's not doing well. The primary comes about. He loses big in the primary. But it times out well with this news breaking. So now he can stay in the headlines as like, hey, they bugged me. So he's going to try to get the lawyers and the politicians on his side anyway.
Okay.
Frinzi also moved at this point to start bringing up the idea of getting cases dismissed in court. He had a number of upcoming cases involving gambling clients, as he often does. And now that this bugging information had come out, he's like, I'm going to keep trying to get them dropped. Because if any of these guys were picked up on the bug, I can bring that up in court. Which, again, from a defense attorney perspective, makes a lot of sense. It's not going to be super successful for him because this bugging took place like 3 years prior to when it gets found out. So it's not directly related to the things going to court. But even bringing it up, I think he just kind of wants to get it out there as often as he can. Just be like, every chance I get, I'm going to say, the FBI bugged me, you know? But again, I don't fault him. Like, that's a good strategy on his part. December 1966, Frinzi asked the Milwaukee City Council to pass a law banning wiretaps in the city limits. Alderman Mark Ryan was in favor, as were some others. The Milwaukee County Labor Council was in favor of it. Frinzi said that the ordinance would keep a police state from existing. A microphone was placed in our office, leading to a cable going direct to the FBI. Some of the most confidential relationships were bugged, even conversations between my wife and my children and myself. The head of the labor union said, "This evil is so widespread that legislation must come. It ought to come from the government closest to the people." William Mulligan, an attorney for the Wisconsin Telephone Company, said his company had no objections so long as exceptions were made so that the company would check on the conditions of wires and connect long-distance calls and things like that. There were certain instances where, like, we have to be able to listen in. That's how phones work. The head of the Milwaukee FBI was invited to attend the hearing but declined, and the matter was tabled for 6 weeks. The local news asked the U.S. attorney for comment, but he declined to say anything because at this time, the Balustrade tax case was still in process. And he's like, I'm not going to talk about wiretapping while I'm actively involved in this major case that has wiretapping.
So I'm curious, before you go on.
Yeah.
And you probably can't clarify this, but
sure.
But what is it going to do? So they're tapping people's phone lines.
Yes.
And it is federally illegal for them to do this, but they're doing it anyways.
Yes.
So now, from your perspective, because the way I see it, if the city provides another law, it's not like the police department is going to go arrest the FBI for doing this. Like,
well, I think that's the idea. Whether they actually would or not, right? That's a whole other question. But I think that's the idea.
Is that they're trying to give the police department the right to go and arrest the FBI for doing this.
Right. So, like, if the FBI is bugging somebody and it's federally illegal to do it, the FBI is not going to arrest the FBI. That's not going to happen. But I think the idea is here that they could then get the police to arrest the FBI or whoever for breaking a state law, or in this case, this is just a city ordinance here they're pushing for. I think that's the idea. Now, you're absolutely right. I don't know that they actually would.
Yeah.
But that, I think, is the idea.
Okay.
Is at least that a different law enforcement agency would be involved. At the end of 1966, after failing to be a candidate for governor twice, Frinzi announced that he was now going to run in the spring election for a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. He wanted to unseat Justice George Curry. Frinzi said the big issue in this case was age. He was 45 years old and Curry was 66 years old. And Curry would have to retire at age 70 according to a state amendment passed in 1955. I'm pretty sure they have reversed this since then.
Okay.
But at this time, you had to mandatorily retire from the court at age 70. Frinzi said that if Curry retired mid-term, the governor would appoint a successor without an election, and he claimed, most of the Democratic assemblymen around the state are for me. Frinzi said he felt the state's garnishment laws needed revision, and he strongly disagreed with Curry's vote with the 4-3 majority, holding that the Milwaukee Braves' move to Atlanta did not violate antitrust laws, as had been ruled by Judge Elmer Roller at the lower level. I'm not super familiar with that case. I tried to look into it a bit. But for people who don't know, Milwaukee used to have a baseball team called the Braves.
Yep.
The Braves then moved to Atlanta and became the Atlanta Braves. At first, they were held up in court saying they couldn't do it because they were violating antitrust laws. How that violates antitrust laws, I don't know. And it's not important to this.
Mm-hmm.
But then, it reached the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, and they reversed it, saying, no, it doesn't violate antitrust laws. You're free to move. So Frinzi's coming out and blasting this. And it's not that he necessarily disagrees with the decision. He doesn't make any legal points here. It's more that he's using the case that we lost our baseball team because of this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his argument here.
And that's a great way to get people to turn against him, right?
Yeah.
I would feel like.
Yes. There's an ongoing investigation among the Bar Association about the bugging of Frinzi's office. There's eight attorneys who are looking into this. What they're actually doing, I don't know. I know they've pulled the transcripts from the court testimony and the Balestrieri case and things like that, but I don't know what they're going to learn that, isn't already out there. By the end of December 1966, Frinzi gets to try his methods. He has William Covelli in court in Kenosha. Covelli, we haven't talked about him in a long time, but big gambler. He was a big suspect in the Tony Biernat kidnapping and murder. If you can remember, way, way far back, he allegedly was abducted by the FBI and dangled over an open grave to try to get him to confess.
I do not remember this, man. That must have been quite a while
ago,
because I feel like I would remember that.
Yeah. So after the Tony Biernat murder in January 1963, Covelli was just being hounded. They saw him as kind of like the weak link, and he was going to crack. So one night he walks out of a tavern, a car with flashing lights, forces him into the back seat. They drive him to the Tony Biernat murder site, allegedly hold him over the shallow grave spot by his belt, and spin their the guys spin their revolvers at him while asking him to talk and say who did it, eventually letting him go. And I still, to this day, I do not believe that it was FBI agents that did this. I don't know who did. I don't know if this whole thing was a hoax on his part, but it was a very thorough hoax because people saw the car with the flashing lights, and when they went out, the police went out and investigated the next day. They found the footprints at the burial site, showing that people were out there. So I don't know the truth of the matter. And the reason I don't think it was the FBI, just to clarify, for people to be like, well, why wasn't it the FBI? The reason I don't think it was is because I don't see it in the records. And because this happened prior to the records being public records,
you feel like
this is the kind of embarrassing crap that would still be in there.
I like the way you put that.
Yeah, because all this other stuff that they were doing blatantly illegally, when they became public, people found out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they didn't just suddenly throw all the records in the trash. So I find it odd that nowhere in here, in those records, does it ever mention it. And when it does mention it, they're basically like, this guy is full of crap.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying the FBI is above doing that. Absolutely not saying that. But I don't see any evidence of that being the case.
Yeah. In this instance, it was probably not them.
Yeah. That is what I'm saying. So anyway, so Covelli at this point is on trial for perjury because he had been brought before a John Doe investigation, not for gambling, but looking into the Tony Biernat murder. And he had been caught lying on a couple times during his testimony. Frinzi brings up, my office was bugged, we got to toss these. He ultimately loses that argument because the John Doe investigation was in 1964. The bugs were in and out in 1963. So they're like, this has nothing to do with his perjury. Like, he perjured himself after we stopped bugging him. Mm-hmm. So good on you for bringing it up. You're a good defense attorney, but it's not going to work. At the very end of December 1966, the Milwaukee Sentinel took the unusual step of writing an editorial on the Supreme Court race. They said if the final race is between Curry and Frinzi, they endorse Curry completely. In favor of Curry, they mentioned his experience and integrity. Against Frinzi, they called him out for criticizing the Milwaukee Braves decision. They said that Frinzi appeared to disagree with the outcome because it was unpopular and not for Wisconsin residents, but he made no claims to the legal arguments that he would have disagreed with. The editorial said the value of an independent judiciary is exactly this. They are not for anyone, and they decide cases on the law, not on how residents will feel about them.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So good on the Milwaukee Sentinel here. For they're like, obviously we don't like that we lost the Braves, but that doesn't mean it was the wrong decision.
Right. And you're endorsing a potential candidate that's saying that we should not have lost the Braves because we didn't want to lose our baseball team, not because it was illegal for the Braves to move.
Right. Right. Partially because of this editorial and partially probably just because he saw that he wasn't gaining much traction. In January, Frinzi removes himself from consideration for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. At this time, the two declared candidates, other than himself, were Justice Curry and Judge Robert Hansen. And in fact, Curry does end up winning again. In March 1967, Dominick Frinzi and attorney Joe Balistrieri, this is Frank's son, were overheard talking about the bugging against Frinzi and Frank Balistrieri. The report that I take this from is kind of redacted, but it looks to me like it's a third attorney sitting in on this conversation that's reporting this. Frinzi did not think that pressing charges would be very effective, pressing charges against the FBI. But he thought it would work to file a lawsuit against the FBI agents involved. Joe Balistrieri felt the best course of action was to sue the telephone company and bring in the agents to testify at that. He said this would more likely lead to a financial settlement than going after the government. I have to say, I think that's a pretty good point.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you sue the phone company, and the phone company was like assisting the government doing something illegal, they're probably just going to pay to make it go away.
Mm-hmm.
You sue the government, you might get a payout, or who knows? Because the government has kind of like bottomless pockets,
Yeah. Well, and there's nobody to really force them to pay anybody. So if they're kind of like, well, we're just not going to pay you. Well, who do you go to from there?
Yeah.
So.
And Frinzi said that no matter what, he had no desire to stop harassing and embarrassing the FBI. He said he did not rule out pressing charges of trespassing against the agent who actually installed the bugs, but he wasn't ready to make that move yet. I mean, that's, even though wiretapping isn't necessarily illegal on the local or state level, he could still trespassing is still illegal.
Yeah, and there's plenty of laws probably that you could.
Yeah. So the fact that they know they had to have broken into the office to put the bug in there, it's already basically illegal in a roundabout way. Wrapping up this episode, William Covelli was found guilty of perjury in May 1967. He had denied meeting Tony Burnett in 1962, and he denied that he was hoping to expand his jukebox business. He denied his role in Kenosha gambling, but numerous people at trial showed that he had met Tony Burnett, he had talked to people about expanding his jukebox business, and he was definitely involved in Kenosha gambling. So Frinzi's attempts to get all this tossed because of the wiretapping failed, and Covelli was guilty. So just kind of, that's as good of a spot to stop as any for how this goes, because this wraps up his next attempts at running for government, which is simultaneously going with these ongoing like wiretapping things that this is going to be a running theme for a while. Is the
We're going to hear a
wiretapping.
lot about wiretapping.
Yeah, because like this is huge. I think today it almost feels sort of like quaint. I don't know if that's the right word, but we're so used to today of the idea that like the FBI, less so today, but definitely back then, was doing shady stuff. Like, we're not really, like, surprised.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, yeah, they were wiretapping people. Yeah, okay. But at this point in time, this was a big deal.
Yeah, and people probably didn't even really realize that the capability was there to do it because a lot of that technology was newer, and they probably didn't fully understand it, you know?
Yeah, so here, like, they're going to bring it up as often as they can, because it's so big, it's so fresh in the conversation. This is the moment to get public opinion swayed one way or the other. And you keep putting up the argument that, you know, it's an invasion of privacy, it's illegal, you know, whereas the FBI is really trying to just not talk about it at all. But if they were forced to talk about it, they, of course, would say, well, we're using it to fight crime. So, you know, who wins that argument? I mean, the answer down the road is the FBI wins that argument because the government, the Congress later passes a law making it legal to wiretap people. I guess the FBI wins that one because later on they're like, well, the solution to make this so you're not doing anything illegal anymore is just make it legal. Which, you know, sure, that didn't make a lot of people happy, but that was ultimately what came out of it.
Yeah. And so now that Dominick Frinzi.
Yeah.
So he if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first time he ran, he actually did get on the ballot, and he was one of the final two. He was running.
He was not one of the final two.
He wasn't. Okay.
He made it to the primary, and he lost in the primary. But he did very well. So much so that after the primary and going into the general election, he still had a significant number of people who refused to stop supporting him and instead support the other guy in the primary.
And that was when they kind of came, there was the rumor that he might have like turned those people towards the Republican candidate or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
There was talk where like he never explicitly did it that we know, but there was talk about people in his support group that were saying like the party treated him so bad that we might just encourage his supporters to just go for the other side. So yeah, and that's, we don't know. Obviously, like votes are secret. We can't see who voted in the primary and then who voted in the general election and whether they changed sides. There's no way to know that. But the numbers do suggest that because in the primary, I think he had like 100,000 votes in the primary. In the general election, the margin was much smaller than that. So it does kind of suggest that because he held out all the way to the end, that at least some of his voters either voted for the other side or didn't bother showing up at all. And that was enough to throw the election. We can never know that 100% because voting is private. But the numbers do suggest that he had a definite negative impact on his own party's race.
To the best of our ability to know it, it doesn't appear like he had a positive effect for the Democrats. He might probably screwed it up. And
yeah, we can never know. Like this is like the third party thing, you know? Mm-hmm. This is like in 1992, you got Bill Clinton, Bush Sr., and Ross Perot. And people will say that Clinton won because Ross Perot took votes away from Bush. Mm-hmm. And then later on, we've got, I'm drawing a blank on the guy, the car safety guy.
The car safety guy.
For the Green Party. And he's in the race when Al Gore is in the race. So the people are saying that he took votes away from Al Gore. Now, I think you could make that argument. I think that argument is probably correct. But we don't know that. Mm-hmm. We don't know that the people who voted for Ross Perot would have voted for Bush. They might just not have voted at all.
Right.
So we don't know that he threw the election.
Right. And just because somebody went and voted for Ross Perot and then maybe doesn't vote, mm-hmm. in the primary election or whatever you call it. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with politics.
That's okay.
But we still don't know even if that, maybe that person just didn't feel like going to vote. It doesn't mean that it was because of Ross Perot that they didn't go vote or something. So
I think it's very likely, and I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw, but we can never really prove that one way or the other.
So, but then it seems like these next two times, he really doesn't, he goes into this and it pretty much stalls out.
He does a very half-hearted effort. It's like he's in there, but he's not getting the newspaper coverage he previously did. He's just not. And I don't know how much of that is his doing or how much the papers just don't want to cover him anymore. But yeah, the governor race, he's half-hearted. The Supreme Court race, like he has maybe one press conference and he's already on his way out. I will say he's not done with politics. Like,
and we're going to have more of this yet.
I believe there's one more that'll be coming up.
Interesting.
And we'll do an episode on it. And and him running for government office is not strictly speaking a mafia related thing, but I think it's relevant mm-hmm. because we clearly see who his backers are when he does run, and the mob guys are big in his corner. Mm-hmm. And especially this one where it times up with the wiretapping thing. The wiretapping thing is clearly involved. The next time, and this is a couple years down, so it's going to be farther on the timeline, he's going to run against the district attorney. And you can just imagine the kind of things they say to each other. Because one guy has been prosecuting the crime and the other guy's been defending the crime. Yeah. So yeah, it's like
stacking two sworn enemies against each other.
So the politics angle isn't strictly speaking mafia related, but I think it influences the crime stuff enough that it's relevant to the story. So I'm going to keep it on the main timeline going forward.
And I think the other part of it is that on the surface, it doesn't seem like the mafia has a big part in him running for politics.
Right.
But we probably wouldn't have really known how ingrained they were into it until he got into office.
Well, that's completely true. That's exactly right. Organized crime flourishes when the government allows it to flourish. And that is why traditionally the biggest organized crime city is considered to be Chicago, mm-hmm. like more so than even New York. And that's because Chicago, everybody knows this. I'm not going to shock anybody by saying this. Chicago has always been corrupt.
They have a long history of corrupt politicians.
Yeah. Like 4 of the last 5 Illinois governors went to prison. Like this is not a shock. But Wisconsin doesn't have that level of corruption. And yeah, if Dominick Frinzi became the governor of Wisconsin, like we don't know. It didn't happen, so we don't know. But it would lead me to suspect that he would be coming down on laws one way or another that may be favorable to mob interests.
Yeah, especially since it's very apparent that, like you said, the mafia is on his side for this.
Yeah.
So they obviously aren't going to do that if they think if they're not going to gain anything from having him in those positions.
Right.
So, all right. So, do you got anything else for this episode? Or
no, that's it.
All right. You want to give us a little sneak peek into what's coming down the road, or do you not really know at this point?
Well, I know what the next one is. Our final 1966, and it is two guys who it's another gambling story, but the guys who were involved in gambling, but also they ran a printing press. So they were printing some other things as well.
Ooh, could be interesting.
And for those of you who don't like the gambling angle, but like the violence angle, a cop gets shot. So there's that.
All right, cool. So that'll be in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And we will wrap this episode up. We want to thank everybody again for their continued support of this podcast. If you do have any questions, comments, anything along those lines, where can they reach out to you, Gavin?
Best way to reach me is milwaukeemafia@gmail.com. I now do have access to the Facebook page again, and people do seem to use that method. I don't prefer you do it that way, but I do now see that again, if that's just the way you want to do it. So
very cool. And then, as always, we do have the Patreon, patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia, or you can find that at MilwaukeeMafia.com as well. And definitely get on that.
Yeah, we got the lowest prices in the business at $2 a month. You get an additional 2 episodes, and I think it's well worth it.
And they're good episodes, and they're fun episodes.
They're good episodes. They're fun episodes. Yeah, I hate self-promoting, but seriously, like I see other people's Patreons, and they're asking $5, $7, $12. We're asking $2.
Yeah, and
we're scraping it, man. like seriously, if you can't afford the $2, I mean, if you can't, you can't. But seriously, come on, we're giving you $2 a month worth of your time, right? I hope.
Yeah, we're charging you $2 and $2 for 2 hours of our time, basically.
Yeah.
So that seems like quite a deal.
I think so.
But you can find that at patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia, and we will be back next week with a Patreon episode. So, when you're on your weeks off, you can always get another episode.
That's right.
Or you can just wait 2 weeks and we'll be back.
That's right. If you need to hear us every week, that's the way to do it.
Do it.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. So
if you don't want to hear us at all, just hit stop.
So with that, we'll wrap this up, and we'll see everybody on the next episode. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.